I watch the contortions that people go through as business owners to fit a job to a person, and they should never do that. I don't know anyone who says, I wished I would have waited longer to deal with this bad behavior. I know plenty of people who say, I wished I would have had the courage to deal with it sooner.
How would you feel if that person came in and said, I'm leaving tomorrow, I'm leaving in 30 days? How would you feel about that? And usually it's like, oh, thank goodness.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Hello, and welcome to the Business Coach Podcast. I'm your host, David Finkel. I've got a treat in store for you this week. I'm having a conversation in this episode with Rich Wood. Rich is the coaching director for Maui Mastermind. He's coached several thousand business owners over the last 20 years. He's a successful business person, business owner, and entrepreneur in his own right. Comes from an engineering background, but has worked with companies in all different types of industries and business models. I've been working and had the good fortune to work with Rich for some time now. And in this conversation, Rich and I dive deep into how do you know when you have the wrong team member? How is it that you can make those adjustments when you notice and spot them? How can you preempt that from happening by doing your hiring better? And how do you, in the course of your first period in interaction with a person over the first 6, 12 months of somebody, how can you spot when they're not the right person? I'm going to share with you in today's conversation questions that you can be asking that will help make it clear for you. Rich is going to be talking about what really stops business owners from making the tough choices and dealing with it. And we're going to give you some language patterns of how to have those tough conversations so you consider yourself forewarned, forearmed, and ready to do that. And Rich will even share with you one way to reduce the liability in those conversations by doing one simple, easy tweak in that conversation. So with that said, without further ado, welcome to this week's episode of The Business Coach. Well, Rich, welcome back to The Business Coach. How are you today?
Thanks, David. I'm excited to be back. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. Now, I know that you get a chance to work with lots and lots of different clients. And one of the comments I was just curious here, with a quick client victory I'm going to ask you about here, like offshore one for us, is recently a client that I had given some coaching to had redone his strategy wherein he's a contractor. They do really, really good work. They've done mostly residential work. You know, they do anywhere from $8 to $9 million a year in sales. And 2 commercial contracts came through, looked to be about an additional $3 million of work from those 2 jobs. I thought that was a pretty cool victory. What's the victory from one of the clients that you coach? And then we'll jump into the heart of the matter.
Yeah, great question. So I have lots of victories from lots of clients. So it's always hard for me to pick which one I want to select, but I'll leave the name of the client off, but it's a client that's got a general practice. He's a medical doctor. He's got a general practice, and his practice has been growing significantly over the last 6 to 8 months. He's been in the Maui coaching program for about 2 years now, and he's really leveraged the tools and the resources that we have inside of the Maui program to help him get accountability out of his team. And his patient base has been growing. His financials have been improving. He's gotten to a place where he's debt-free now, which is a situation for him that's a phenomenal win for him. And he recently got into a place where he was able to purchase another practice and absorb that practice into his business. So he's effectively doubled the revenue size of his business and quadrupled the size of his profits in the course of the last 6 or 8 months just by bringing on these additional practice clients.
I love it. I love it. And this idea of accountability, really important. And it fits into what we're going to talk about today. I mean, you talk about how can he hold his team more effectively accountable. And today I had down for you and I to be talking about, Rich, this really important question about how do I know that I've got, and I'm going to frame it in a very specific way. How do I know when I've got the wrong team member? And where this came up was there's one of our clients, delightful person, just truly a good human being, was struggling with the idea of knowing if she had the right team members and perhaps hanging on to these team members beyond the point which she knew that they weren't the right one. We're looking at probably hanging on to some of these people for over a year or 2 longer than the point that she should have. And so I thought we would have this conversation about how do we know we've got the wrong team member? I mean, on the extreme edges, things become pretty obvious, right? When I have obviously the right person, that's pretty clear. When I have obviously the wrong person, it also is pretty clear. The harder stuff is the stuff in the middle. That tends to be a bit harder with that. And so we're going to start off by just talking, Rich, about with existing team members, what are some ways that I can look at that I can see that I obviously have the wrong person on the team with that part? I'm curious what that sparks for you. Then I'm going to share a few more thoughts and we'll build today.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I usually look at as being leading indicators of potentially having the wrong people in the wrong places. And I say that for a reason because sometimes you have to make an assessment of, did I hire the right person in for the wrong job? Do I have the right person working that has great work ethic, but they're a mismatch to the responsibilities? So part of the question usually is, after I go through an investment of time and energy and money to bring somebody into the company, I have to ask the question, are they a good fit for the company culture? Are they a good fit for the job? Or are they in the wrong job? And if I move them to a different job, are they going to contribute much more? So I think one thing to ask is, do we have the right person, but the right person in the wrong job? And then the other thing that there's a whole layer of analysis that one can go through about whether or not I have the wrong person in the company to begin with. And that's usually an easier thing to see, in that they're not getting the job done, they're not meeting the KPIs and so on.
It's interesting. You bring up a distinction of, it's not just do I have the wrong person, but do I have a good quality person sitting in the wrong seat inside my company is an important one. And
Right.
I've known that I've coached a lot of people through the following, which is I see the mistake that business owners make is the ideal best practice is you have a job that needs to get done and you find the right person to do the job that needs to be done. The job to be done is the criteria, and you find the person that fits that criteria. What I notice a lot of business owners do, because they don't like dealing with the unpleasantness, is they say, well, I know I have a good person, they're loyal, they're kind, they're whatever. And so I say, how do I fit the job to the person versus the person are they really a fit for the job? And I've probably coached, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 people over the last 10 years through my experience has shown, and looking at this with a lot of companies we work with, it's almost always, not always, but almost always the wrong strategy to fit the job to the person than it is to fit the person that they fit the job. And the exception that I've experienced with that is in the case when I have a truly great person, but they're lacking one element to do that job. And if there's a simple way that you can augment their abilities with another person or by slightly shifting some functions to somebody else,
Right.
I don't mind doing that at all. But I noticed that it's like, I don't know if you've ever had your kids play Twister, that old game where you have your hands and your feet on colors. I
Right.
watch the contortions that people go through as business owners to fit a job to a person, and they should never do that for that particular person. It was wholly unworkable. What does that
Yeah. So
spark for you?
what that brings to mind is that, I worked with a lot of business owners who rush the hiring process. And when they rush the hiring process, they're not vetting those potential new employees very well. They're not creating must-haves that are very important to defining a role in the person. They're not really good at defining the must-haves. They're skimming through the top level. They're just not doing a great job at hiring the right people to begin with. And when that happens, we like to get people cut at the very beginning, continue the process on to find the right person. But if you end up hiring somebody that is not a good fit for the company, I think it's important for business owners to be able to make that determination quickly and make the cut quickly so that you can get the right person in the right job to move the business forward.
Yeah. And what you say makes sense there. First of all, there might be another job to be done in the company, and they might be the right person to do that job to be done. And that's good. If, in any new hire, I have to think, do they have certain criteria for the job? But I also have to ask, are they a fit for the company? So if I found
Right.
somebody who is a fit for the company culturally and intelligence-wise and character-wise, if I do have another job to be done, that's a good thing if that person's a better fit there. Again, being aware of trying to fit the job to the person. We're going to get back to hiring in a moment here. I wanted to share I was thinking about it in respect to this person. So when this client of ours reached out to me and she said, I'm really struggling. I have people on my team I know probably shouldn't be there. I at first thought, Rich, I thought she was going to tell me that emotionally it was just really intimidating or unpleasant or uncomfortable to make the hard move to just let this person or these people go. And so that was my first part of coaching. And so we'll start there. How would you coach somebody to, they know that, I hate making a name because I know there's an audience member who's got that name. So we'll
Right.
call this person X. If we know that X really is not the right person, what coaching would you give to a business owner that X needs to go? And they know they need to go, but they're just scared to do the unpleasantries of letting them go.
Well, my personality is such that I, encourage people to walk up to the edge of the cliff and jump off and to rip that Band-Aid off quickly. They're really not doing themselves any good. They're really not doing the employee a favor by holding them inside of something that's just not working, because that's not a good situation altogether. So my coaching is always, if you have somebody that's not working, identify the basis of the reasons for why it's not working so you can communicate that, set a timeline up, bring your HR person in, make it a two-way conversation with the employee, and then just tell them it's not working out and send them on their way.
Yeah. And I think what you say makes a lot of sense with it. I know for me, one of the things that helped me was about a decade ago, I noticed a pattern for me in the businesses that I ran, Rich, wherein I found there were a lot of occasions where I would finesse a situation. I would nibble at the edges. I would ask indirectly for what I wanted or needed. I would lay out expectations, but I would do that a little bit more on the periphery versus like
Right.
directly. And when I made the change to just be very direct with people internally and be non-nuanced about that and say, look, here's what my expectations are. They're X, Y, and Z. Are those reasonable? Do you agree to them? What it made it easier for me was when those expectations weren't being met, I would be much more able to go back and say, as we talked about, expectations were X, Y, and Z. What I'm observing is, this is the language pattern we tell our clients all the time. What I'm observing is this and this. That's not
Right.
meeting the thing. What that's causing is sharing that part. Here's what I need to see. Are you able to do that? You are. Are you committed to doing that? Great. So I will circle back with you in the next 2 weeks about these things. And here's what you've agreed to do. And that adult conversation, when I've had that along the way, non-nuanced directly, when I can see that the person's not doing that, it makes it much easier for me at some point to say, look, we've talked about this. These were the expectations, X, Y, and Z. You're not getting that done. We've talked about it on 2 separate occasions. It's still not changed. It's clear to me that we don't have the right fit. And I want to talk with you about what does it look like for us to transition, for you not to be working here anymore. And I think that for me, one of the cures for the discomfort of that later conversation was preempting it by making sure I was better about the earlier conversations of being a direct, clear, non-nuanced communicator that didn't try to finesse things. I had the harder conversations earlier when on a scale of 1 to 10, they were like a 2 or a 3 in terms of intensity, which made the later conversation no longer an 8, 9, or a 10. It made it a 6, which made it a lot more willing to do that. Have you found any tips or tricks that you work with a client about making sure that they preempt that later conversation by what they do earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So really I divide employees that need to move on to another company into 2 categories. One is they've done something that is in violation of company policy. They've done something that doesn't fit with the culture of the company. They've done something that's egregious that warrants immediate termination. And that's not a 1-2 conversation. That's a conversation that says, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to terminate you, and here's the reasons why, and then you're done with it. But the other part of it is a performance improvement plan. If you identify an employee that is having some challenges in their job, then setting it up with the 1-2 conversation where you have, you create a 30-day performance improvement plan that says, these are the areas of deficiency. These are the things that we're looking for. This is your job description. These are the KPIs you're being held accountable to. Are we clear on that? So having that 1-2 conversation to give them a 30-day opportunity to correct the deficiencies, I think is a better way to go. And then if they don't correct the deficiencies specific to the performance improvement plan, that you've created and documented, then it makes that last conversation of this just isn't working out. I think it makes it a lot easier to move people along.
You bring up a really important distinction, which is this idea between acute situations, this person has done something egregious, out of bounds, we're done, and the chronic thing where this person is chronically underperforming or behaving in a manner that isn't by itself enough if it were a one-time thing, but because it's happening again and again, they're not meeting standards, or
Right.
there's some behavior that hasn't reached the egregious threshold, but it's enough of an irritant for the environment. That's more of the 1-2 conversations. And I think that's an important one. You said something else earlier I want to go back to. It was really good, which is having your HR person or having a second pertinent person bearing witness in the room for that conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Talk about that. And then I want you to also just comment on, if you would, I think a mistake I see is that business owners, they over talk in that conversation. They go way into too much detail that only gets them into hot water or upsets the other person, or they want to talk about why it was such a hard thing for them to make this decision. And they talk about their feelings in a way that the other person is not at all placed to hear that. But talk, first of all, why that second person in there? Because it's a really good, subtle, but very good thing to have going on.
Yeah, so that's something I encourage everybody to do when they have these difficult conversations with employees. And it's usually have your HR person in there, but if you don't have an HR person, have somebody else in the room, because it avoids having the he said, she said, or the he said kind of conversation that it can be misconstrued. And I think that it just sets the company owner up, or the terminating person that's doing the termination. It sets them up to have much more accountability, and it prevents a liability situation from occurring. So the whole concept of having two people in the room is the whole concept of avoiding a liability situation that could explode into something that's much more costly for the company.
Yeah. And it also gives a little support with that part. And I found for myself that the best way to have that conversation is just be direct with it. Look, I know it's not what either of us intended when we started this part, but this is where we are, and this is what needs to happen now, right? Short, sweet, direct with that part. Going back here, we talked about in the hiring part, right? Part of avoiding having the wrong team is to hire better.
Right.
And I always find it so interesting about, we will spend hundreds of hours working with a team member, but consistently when I work with a new client, they will begrudge me the extra 1 hour I coach them to spend before they ever start hiring, to more clearly define the role, how value's created, how value's measured, and to look at very clearly that for this hire to be successful, what are the non-negotiable 4 or 5
Right.
things about the person I'm hiring? And in all, that takes somebody probably about an hour to do. And they say, well, I don't have time, I need someone right away. And so they don't take the time to do the hire appropriately, the best practice way. And
Right.
then they'll waste 100x that down the road with all the downstream effects, plus the emotion, versus just taking that extra time up front to be smart about what it is we really need in this person that are non-negotiable for them to be successful in this role.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that I always go back to is measure twice, cut once. Right? So if you spend energy up front, making sure that you're measuring what you want out of the job, measuring what you're looking for as KPIs from this person, and then developing a job description that has all of that written in clear black and white. It does two things when you go through that process. It helps the business owner, the hiring person, it helps them clarify what it is I'm really looking for in this person. What is it that I really want out of this job? And what kind of performance results am I looking for? I think it absolutely helps to do that. So being clear on what you want and what the performance drivers are that you're looking for out of this person, that's going to go a long way to make sure that you get the right person up front. But it also makes sure that the person that's getting hired understands what their job is all about, understands what the performance metrics are that you're looking for out of this person. So I think it's absolutely important to do that.
Yeah, it sets them up to succeed and increases the odds that they're going to actually be successful with that. So going back to this client I said, who I thought was just afraid to have the conversation. So that was my first coaching, Rich. I talked with her about, look, it's going to be 72 hours of unpleasantness, 72 minutes of hell. and then it'll be an immense relief for the rest of your life.
Right.
And she's like, no, that wasn't it, David. I'm willing to have the conversation. Her comment was, it's actually that she's not seeing until it's way too late that the person is clearly the wrong person. I said, thank you. Now, if you redirect me that way, that there's a different solution because it's actually a different problem. When I shared is this idea that, when I do a hire, now that we know what the must-haves are, and now that we're clear on these are the ways that they create the most value and how the company and they both agree on that this is how the value is going to be measured. Now I can check in formally at the 30, 90, 180, and 1 year mark with that new person. And I know for me, Rich, what I've learned to do is I actually put it on a calendar as a tickler reminder. Okay, today I'm going to take, it only takes me 15 minutes to do the 30-day check-in because I take out my must-haves. I look at if I've got 4 must-haves for the role, for example, this person must have, a 10-year track record of success managing operations in a warehouse similar in scale to ours. And they must be hyper organized. And must-have number 3 was they must be really good about getting warehouse staff to perform well and accountable. And number 4 was they must be a good communicator to communicate to the other departments about where status is on things. I just made that up. But if that's what it is, I just take 15 minutes and say, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, how can I rate this person on each of those 4 things? And I did that when I hired them. And when I hired them, I was going off of just their interview information, going on just maybe a few reference checks that I did. But now I've got 30 or 90 days of behavior to support that. And it makes it easy for me to say, if I've scored them 4s and 5s on everything, I probably made a pretty good hire. If I've scored them a 2 and a 3 on several things, the time to adjust that is not another year. That I need to deal with that right away. What's something else that you found has been helpful for you and your clients in terms of spotting earlier when it's clear we have the wrong person?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that I deal with a lot of my clients is that they tend to hide their head or bury their head when issues come up. They tend to want to ignore the things that are important with respect to performance. And it could be, how people's attitude is with the client that's coming in from the outside. It could be an attitude issue that they have with other employees. So I think a lot of times people tend to want to ignore the bad stuff because it's a conflict kind of situation. So, my advice to them is that if you have the KPIs and if you have an accountability framework that's built in, whether the person is getting the job done or not. And as soon as you identify that the employee is not getting the job done, set up corrective measures quickly so that you can get the employee back on track. And that's going to save a lot of grief. But if you see a pattern of non-performance, that's something that you have to address with a stronger conversation.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who says, I wished I would have waited longer to deal with this bad behavior. I know plenty of people who say, I wished I would have had the courage to deal with it sooner.
And a lot of people don't like conflict. A lot of business owners don't like conflict. And I think that whole concept of not liking conflict forces people into a situation where they accept bad behavior or they accept poor performance. And that's going to ultimately end up coming back at you and impacting the company.
Yeah. And I've got 2 other questions. So first of all, when I think about that, 15 minutes to check in at the 30, 90, 180, and 1 year mark, we're talking an hour over the course of a year for me just to reflect on that new hire. Not too much to ask, right? That's a small investment. There are 2 follow-on questions that when I think I might have an issue, I ask these 2 questions, Rich, and almost always they give me a very clear answer. And the question I ask is, knowing all that I know now, would I hire this position? Would I hire this person for this position today? And then the second one is one that one of my mentors shared with me, which I absolutely love, which was, he said, David, if this person came to you and told you that they found another job and that they would be transitioning into that new job over 30 days, would you, in your heart of hearts, be happy? You might not say you would be happy, but in your heart of hearts, would you be happy? And when he said that, I'm like, you know what? I look back at the people I kept on the team over my 30 years in business. I'm like, there are so many people that if they had told me that they found another job, I would have been like, hallelujah, I don't have to let you go because I was, too immature or scared to deal with the tough conversation 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And I thought that was brilliant.
I think business owners know when somebody's not getting the job done. I think that there's this whole gut instinct thing that's going on in the backstream in your consciousness that says, I know that this person's not really working out. And it's just that whole avoidance issue to try to deal with it directly. But I don't think, having the 30, 60, 90 day, 180-day check-ins, I think is great. It forces you to check in. But I think that most people know when somebody's not working out. But I think, the whole, how would you feel if that person came in and said, I'm leaving tomorrow, I'm leaving in 30 days. How would you feel about that? And usually it's like, oh, thank goodness.
It's interesting. So I go back to this client and I know her well. And I think for her, there's probably an element of she busies herself in the business so that she doesn't have to look, so that she doesn't have to see the obvious, so that she doesn't have to deal with whatever that is. And I can directly relate to that because that's who I used to behave, 15, 20 years ago. And I found for me that if I can change it where there's more consistent, formalized check-ins with things, for me, that's helpful. And, we're working, Rich, with a joint client, as you know. It's a large medical group, $100 million plus business.
Right.
And one of the things we're doing was we're coaching their leaders is about this very thing. Like, they were doing employee appraisals once a year driven by HR as a formality. HR would send out the link. They would go into their HR software and they would fill out the scores for their people. It would take them half an hour per person of misery. They'd meet with people. They would mix in money and the performance appraisal all together. No learning happened. Nobody liked it. It was really a tough one. And I just commented, I said, well, that the way that all your key reports, the way they create value, you've already defined what those are. 1, 2, or 3 things for that role. And you know what the must-haves for that position were because that's how you're hiring. What if instead of doing your formal, I don't remember the HR software they use, maybe it was Paylocity or Paycor or one of the other ones that are out there, but rather than doing the formal version of that, what if you were just to ask and say, hey, Henry, we're going to be meeting in 2 weeks' time. We've talked a lot about how the 2 things that you do that create the most value are X and Y. And so in advance of our meeting, I want you to give some thought and give yourself a self-score. On a scale of 1 to 5 on each of those variables, how well do you think that you're doing in personally delivering the value, which is how you do from your role? And I want you also to jot down what are the victories that you have under each category. And if you could do 1 or 2 things different going forward for the next 90 to 180 days in each of these 2 areas, what 1 or 2 things would help you deliver even more value? I'll in parallel do the same. And then when we get together, we'll spend half an hour comparing notes. Are you game for that, Henry? And Henry's going to go, yeah. There's no mention of making money get mixed in with that. So it lowers the fear factor. It's driven not just by you as the manager with your direct reports, it's peer driven. They get a voice, you get to compare perceptions. And nowhere are you saying, are you a bad person? You're saying, how do you think you're doing on delivering value? What's going well about that? And going forward, if you were to make 1 or 2 simple changes, what would they be? That would be a good best practice in a mid to large size enterprise, wherein you could just make this a formal thing that you do each quarter. If I've got 9 direct reports, maybe I do half of them this quarter, half the next quarter. And I don't turn it into something it's not. This is for me to give them information and coaching so that they can be a better team member and to celebrate progress where we see that, not to come in there and formally ding them over the head with a hammer. Does that spark anything for you?
Yeah. So what it sparks for me is this idea that, we as managers, leaders of the organization, we have a responsibility to bring people into the organization and to develop them. And by developing them, we're rooting them in the culture of the business and we're developing skills and capabilities. And I make a commitment myself to everybody that I work with that when I bring you into this company, I want you to leave here. At some point in the future, you will leave. You'll likely go find another job someplace else. It's my responsibility to make sure that when you leave this company, that you leave with better skills and you leave as a more capable, experienced person in the job that you want to do. That's my commitment to you. So I always try to encourage new employees to discuss what their goals and objectives are in the onboarding process. What is it that you're looking to get out of this job, so that as a leader, can understand how I can coach them and how I can carry them forward in the business. And I think a lot of business owners really don't do that. They hire people in and then they throw them into the mix, and they don't really nurture them. But it's important, I think, to understand that we make a significant investment in finding people and in recruiting people and hiring people and onboarding people. So it's up to us to make that commitment to get a return on investment, if you will, for every person that we hire. So I think that having those check-ins like that is, I think, a great thing to do. But start it at the beginning in the onboarding process. Don't wait 90 days or 180 days or a year to do a performance review before you're checking in on whether or not you're moving this client or this employee down the path.
And when I hear you say this, Rich, what I recognize is that I, as a manager or an owner of a business or a leader in a business, I want to have more time with my better people. Yet invariably, if I look at it, so many business owners invert that, and they spend their time dealing with the problem people, trying to fix a problem person with that part. And what I tell them is, look, the sooner I can identify if someone is not going to make the cut, if I can do that, the sooner I can cut off that investment, I can put that energy into my better people.
Right.
And those better people are the ones that are going to flourish and help the company flourish. I think that's an important one, because I look back at, not if I spread myself across everybody equally, what happens is invariably the squeaky wheels are the ones that have performance issues.
Right.
So I just get sucked over there. And I noticed that if I tried to fix the squeaky wheels quickly, their behavior shows me, are they really fixable? And I've got a good friend of mine that used to call it can't do, won't, don't know how. Is this something they can't do? Is this something they won't do, an attitude issue? Or that something that's more of a training issue, they just don't know how?
Right.
And I've learned from my end that if after putting in some energy, they're not showing improvement with that part, I recognize that it's not a don't know how. It's either a can't do or a won't do. And I need to find, if it's a can't do, is there another job to be done that is valuable, that they are better suited for, or they can't stay there. I can't keep a can't do in a role that they're not going to be successful. And a won't do, I directly address that, like, between the eyes. And if they're not going to change that, wonderful, you've made the decision. I wish you the best of luck in your next place of employment, your next job, because they can't stay with us either.
Yeah, what that strikes for me, David, is that when you know somebody's not getting the job done as a business owner, you have to make the determination quickly, make the decision quickly, and execute on the decision quickly, because you're not doing the company any favors. You're not doing the employee any favors. If they're not working out, cut them quickly and move on and find the right person, because that has a long-term impact on the business. Because think about it, you have to terminate somebody. You have to go back through the whole hiring process. You have to go through the whole onboarding process, and you have to refine your must-haves to make sure that you have corrective action built in to ensure that you're not doing this, making the same mistake again, right? So the idea, I think, is it's about time and return on investment. Cut them.
I love that.
On.
I'm going to ask you for you to share, if you had a listener. One of the things we do in the Business Coach is we always say, I want everyone to leave an episode of this podcast with at least one concrete, high value idea, and understanding how they can behave that idea, how they can use that idea, implement that idea. Because it's always been a frustration of mine, people who tell me what to do, but they don't give me the how to do the what. I just find that maddening. And so mine today was this distinction of acute situations versus more the chronic stuff. And with
Right.
acute, we're going to make something happen quickly with that part. With the chronic, we've got some steps to take along the way. What would be your takeaway, or what you would invite them to have for their takeaway?
Yeah, so I would invite everybody listening to have this one takeaway. So I use the word measure twice, cut once. How about measure twice, don't cut at all? Because if you do a really good job with your must-haves, if you really do a great job identifying the job description and the KPIs that you're looking for performance out of this person on, then you do a great job hiring the right person and onboarding that person. You never have to cut. So measure twice, cut 0 times.
I love it. I love it. And as something to aspire to, I like that. The energy front loaded to find the right person by defining the role and what you're looking for, selecting against that criteria, onboarding more effectively. We prevent versus put out the fire down the road. I love that. Rich, thank you for joining us today on The Business Coach. I really appreciate it. It's always a fun thing to do, to get some time together talking about business with you. So thank you for being part of it today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Absolutely. And to our audience out there, if you haven't already, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. And then again, I'm going to ask you a favor. Is there one or two other business owners that you know that you think would really get value from a conversation like Rich and I have had today? Forward them the link to the podcast, just like you have. Hey, tell them to check it out. So thank you, everybody. And Rich, thank you again.
See you, David.